Hello and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akeridoluale. The headlines. G7 leaders vow to support Ukraine for, quote, as long as it takes. Vladimir Zelenskiy asks the G7 for an air shield as rockets rain down on his country. And Russian President Vladimir Putin expresses concern about Zaporizhzhia's nuclear plant in conversation with the IAEA. Thanks for staying with us. Welcome. U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin has arrived in Brussels for a two-day NATO Ministers of Defense meeting. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy had appealed to leaders of the Group of Seven Nations yesterday for more air defense capabilities, and the G7 had in turn vowed to support Kiev for as long as it takes, while warning Russia against any use of nuclear weapons. NATO said it was closely monitoring Russia's nuclear forces following a string of Russian battlefield defeats in Ukraine, and that the allies were also boosting security around key infrastructure after recent attacks on Baltic Sea gas pipelines. And let's tell you a bit more about that G7 meeting. The US President Joe Biden and others met virtually to discuss what more they could do to support Ukraine, and listened to President Volodymyr Zelenskiy, who asked the leaders of the G7 group of countries to urgently supply Ukraine with air defense weapons after Russia rained down cruise missiles on cities across the country in a new escalation after war. Mr. Zelensky has called air defense systems his #1 priority. Mr. Biden has already promised more air defense, a pledge that Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said would extend the conflict. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says any attack on infrastructure critical to the NATO military alliance would trigger a united and determined response. Mr. Stoltenberg told a news conference that NATO allies were increasing security around key installations after attacks on gas pipelines running under the Baltic Sea.
We will take further steps to strengthen our resilience and protect our critical infrastructure. Any deliberate attack against allies' critical infrastructure would be met with a united and determined response. President Putin's veiled nuclear threats are dangerous and irresponsible. Russia knows that the nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. We are closely monitoring Russia's nuclear forces. We have not seen any changes in Russia's posture, but we remain vigilant. Ukraine has the momentum and continues to make significant gains, while Russia is increasingly resorting to horrific and indiscriminate attacks on civilians and critical infrastructure. And we need to ramp up production of ammunition and weapons to both ensure the deterrence on defense of our own allies, NATO allies, but also to have enough to continue for the long haul to provide support to Ukraine. But just to prevent any misunderstanding, this work doesn't start now. It has been going on for some time, but of course the longer the war in Ukraine continues, this work on with the industry becomes more and more important.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference.
In the meantime, Canada says it will send 40 more combat engineers to help support Polish efforts to train Ukrainian forces as part of its commitment to increasing military aid for Ukraine. The Canadian Armed Forces have trained more than 33,000 Ukrainian military and security personnel since 2015, but have paused aspects of the training effort since February. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has said his government would consider providing military training to Ukrainian forces in their war with Russia. The Prime Minister said he had spoken to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy about what other contributions Australia could make to Ukraine's war efforts. He adds that the government is considering training Ukrainian military personnel, describing Russia's targeting of civilians as appalling attacks. Reports differed on where that training might be provided, with some news organizations saying Australian trainers would be sent to Ukraine, while other reports said the training would not take place inside Ukrainian territory. And as we have been reporting, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy has asked a group of 7 nations for more air defense capabilities to stop Russia and to back his initiative for an international observer mission on the Belarusian border. Let's hear what he told the G7 leaders during the virtual meeting. I'm being informed here that that we'll come back to in a couple of moments. In the meantime, let's talk to Dr. Tony Agbons, researcher, senior lecturer at the Anglia Ruskin University in London. Good morning, Doc. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, good morning, Ladi. How are you doing over there in Lagos?
Well, we're hanging in there. Thank you very much. I want to start, of course, with economics and the fallout, the economic fallout of this battle ongoing in Ukraine. In the United Kingdom, it appears as if it's, shall I say, new leaders are finding it difficult to get a grasp of the economic situation, particularly the energy crisis. There have been reversals, some level of somersaults, you know, in terms of policy. But how is it being received by the average resident of the UK, do you think?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ladi. There's, I would say, a kind of, you know, policy chaos at the moment here in the United Kingdom. And this has led to, you know, uncertainty as far as the economic stability of the UK is concerned. You will agree with me that before this new government of the UK, led by Liz Truss, came in, there have been a series of issues economically with the high energy costs, inflation already rising, the interest rates being raised by the Bank of England, just to bring some measure of stability. But the midterm economic announcement made by the new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, didn't particularly go well with a lot of the those who run the economy here. And we saw that immediately after his announcement, the value of the pound started depreciating against the US dollar at an all-time high. And there were a lot of meetings. The Conservative Party, the government in power, almost imploded during their conference. And shockingly, the Chancellor had to make a U-turn on the 45p tax rates that he has actually brought in. So, but immediately he made that U-turn, the value of the pound stabilized. And while we were taking that in, there have been some other issues as to some of the new policies that the Chancellor have announced, where they are going to get funding for it, almost about 60 billion pounds. So there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment, and it's not boding well for the UK economy at the moment.
Now, you referenced there 60 billion pounds. That 60 billion pounds, if we put it in context, is just first is for 6 months, and it is money to be used to cap how much households in Britain would pay for energy costs, no matter how expensive they get, to a maximum of £2,500 per month. That is, if it gets to be much more than that, the British government would bear the cost, and that's what that 60 billion is for. And as you pointed out, there are big questions about where it's going to come from. The IMF is reporting that, look, there needs to be a lot of care taken here, that the British Treasury doesn't have that much wiggle room, both in terms of how much fund it has and how much it can access, even by way of borrowing. It had already borrowed so much for COVID-19 and all of that, so there's not much wiggle room. Now, in terms of £2,500, because when we speak to some of the people who live in Britain, Even the limit of £2,500 is contentious. There are so many people saying even that they cannot afford.
Yeah, the thing is, the 60 billion pounds is for a whole lot of things, not just for the to cover the energy cap. It's for some of the spending cuts that the PM put in place. So it covers a lot of things within the UK economy. But the energy cap is going to take a large chunk of that. So, but what we are seeing, I think, for most of us who are keen observers of how the UK economy works, what we are seeing is the improper handling of the energy crisis, which is as a direct consequence of this Russian invasion of Ukraine. So I think what most analysts are saying now is that the end game of this whole thing for the UK economy is for the windfall tax to be imposed on the energy company. Because we know, as told us by the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer here in the UK, in the next 2 years, this energy company are going to be making a profit of about 170 billion pounds, which is unexpected profit. So that may actually be a solution to all this problem.
Let's look at the situation a bit more broadly. I mean, even about the issue of supply, because it is the supply or lack of that is driving the issue of prices and is affecting the households and the businesses. Britain normally is not so open to the shocks of supply because Britain has its own supply of oil and gas largely. But more recently, there has been change in the mix, which is why the whole issue of supply has become critical. Now, but on the street, have you noticed, I mean, we're talking about inflation. There are those who have said that inflation has gone sky high, but we haven't yet seen that at the supermarkets or at the gas pumps and so on, have we? In the case of the UK?
Yeah, we have. The inflation, the prices of all goods and services have gone up. I go to the shop, we all buy things. So, and on the street, you see there's a lot of grumbling and murmuring. So inflation is really biting. I think the UK inflation figures is so high at the moment. I think since the early 90s, it hasn't been this figure. And that is the reason why the COB, Central Bank of England, has, increased the interest rate about twice already. And as I speak to you, there's even a housing crisis is even brewing because mortgage lenders, they are withdrawing their services from the market. They don't want to, serve people, first-time buyers who want to buy their homes here in the UK. So because at the moment, the mortgage rate is about 6.0 as of yesterday. So it's a spiral, if I want to put it that way.
And that is having political consequences because yesterday I was talking to our correspondent in London, Juliana Olainka, and one of the things that we discussed was the fact that, I mean, under normal circumstances, if everything was okay, the UK is not expected to have an election until about 2024. That's when the next scheduled election should be. But that because of this issue, this economic crisis, and the handling, the perceived handling of it by the Truss government over the last couple of weeks, there are those who are talking. You mentioned Keir Starmer there. Keir Starmer, of course, is driving for elections to happen sooner than 2024, that the British people cannot wait. Then there's the complication with Scotland. Scotland is also trying to get a referendum into the into the mix at this point. There's the Northern Ireland crisis that came from Brexit, which has not yet, completely been resolved. So there are many issues on which to fight an election. But do you think that the British people themselves would be willing to go to the polls so quickly, knowing that so many other things are happening? The war in Ukraine has not stopped and is not going to stop for the purpose of the British elections.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, the British people, we are election weary. We are election weary. We've had, I think, from David Cameron to trying to remember her name now.
Theresa May.
Theresa May.
You mean Theresa May? Yeah.
To Boris Johnson. This is the fourth prime minister we're having in about 6 years. It's just, we are election weary. People are tired of voting all the time. And the only reason why I think there might be election is that a number of the senior figures in the Conservative Party, the government in power, they are showing a lot of discontent, and they are showing it publicly, which is very, very unparliamentary, using the British terminology there. So, so that for me is the fear that we may have an election possibly next year. But if you ask the average British person, we are wary. For Scotland, the matter has gone to court. The Lord Advocate of Scotland was presenting their case yesterday in the court here in the UK. That particular referendum issue is going to be a long drawn battle, and we are all watching keenly.
In terms of the Northern Ireland one and Brexit, because at the beginning of our conversation, I made reference to the fact that we are, the UK, apart from what it is now doing with reference to Ukraine and the headwinds that have come with that, was coming off Brexit. And then COVID met Brexit on the ground before the war in Ukraine now met a Brexit on the ground. So there have been quite a number of issues that the British have had to swallow. So in terms of the Northern Ireland backstop, in fact, the Northern Ireland backstop put Boris Johnson at loggerheads with the rest of Europe, because it meant him breaking the withdrawal agreement, which he said under the law he could, the Europeans said he couldn't. So how much of that do you think is feeding into this, and how much support can Liz Truss expect from her European colleagues, knowing fully well that she was a member of Boris Johnson's government, and she backed this issue of withdrawing from the backstop?
Yeah, with regards to the Northern Ireland EU fiasco, I think if the European Union wants to be helpful to the UK as an ally, because take it or leave it, the United Kingdom is one of the largest economy in the world. The EU also needs the UK. So I think there will be a series of negotiations. The war in Ukraine and some internal issues bordering on the economy has been taking a lot of time. So negotiations will come in, and like I've discussed with some of my Irish friends here in the UK, and I always tell them that when you come to the negotiation table, you're not going to get everything you want. So you leave some and then you take some. So I believe that will be sorted out so that some of these internal battles that the Liz Truss premiership is facing will abate a little bit.
I must ask you about the battlefield itself. I mean, the war in Ukraine, which is creating more of the more immediate problems for both the government and the people. It does appear as if there's an escalation. When people were thinking that, well, perhaps, there might be some lull, and then, as you pointed out, when you come to the negotiating table, you win some, you lose some, so that everybody walks away believing that they had something. It doesn't appear as if that's happening. In fact, there is now the talk of the use of nuclear weapons, and the EU is preparing, as we are told, its citizens for the possibility of that. The Russians already did, and the Ukrainians, at a point in the past, already also started handing out tablets in case. What's your view of this? What do you think? I mean, just as the war is hitting its 7-month mark, or 8th-month mark, rather, we are talking nuclear weapons.
Yeah, you are very right there, like the war, the crisis has escalated, and this has come as a shock to the entire world. First was the the gains that the Ukrainians were making, pushing the Russian artillery back, taking back territories. And then we had that threat from Russia, from Putin, when he said he's not taking off the use of nuclear weapons off the table. And then we have that, funny and bogus referendum, which the Russians had in the territories they control in the Ukraine, which the entire world condemned that. And then the attack on the bridge in Crimea, and then Russia have used that now as an excuse to be throwing missiles. Over 80 missiles have been thrown into Ukraine this week alone. And innocent people are being killed. Yesterday, the United Nations Human Rights Council, the chair, was speaking yesterday, and he said what Russia is doing is against international conventions. So this should be a military battle, should be a military issue, but just throwing missiles into Ukrainian cities, Zaporizhia, Kharkiv, Kyiv, even the capital, and the innocent people are just being killed. So this war has escalated, and to be honest, I must say that Russia have to be watched very well, because with the way Vladimir Putin is going, he may actually use nuclear weapons, which will be taking the world back, ages. We just hope that this man will listen to the voice of reason, because he's just throwing missiles into Ukraine. And when you look at this crisis, Ukraine have not thrown anything into Russia. So they are just defending their territories. So this is a senseless and mindless war, which should not have happened anyway. But a good thing that NATO, the US, the EU, there was even a meeting of the G7 2 days ago, where Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the Americans, had a meeting, and they've promised that they are with Ukraine all the way. And I really love the strong language of the NATO Secretary General yesterday, Jens Stoltenberg, when he said that it is Russia that will end this war. They started it. They have to end it. It is really appalling, the level of escalation that this war have turned into.
Indeed, Dr. Tony Agbons, senior lecturer at the Anglia Ruskin University in London, as always, thank you for your perspective and for your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Ladi. Have a great day.
You too. And after the break, the worst is yet to come. That's the IMF verdict as it cuts 2023 growth outlook amidst colliding global shocks. Details in a moment. Please stay on this. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. We can now return to our story on the Ukrainian president asking leaders of the group of 7 nations for more air defense capabilities to stop Russia and to back his initiative for an international observer mission on the Belarusian border.
Росія має бути повністю їх, а прагне втягнути безпосередньо. Перший пункт – оборонна підтримка.
The first point is defense support, air shield for Ukraine. This is a part of the security guarantees that are an element of our peace formula. When Ukraine receives a sufficient quantity of modern and effective air defense systems, the key element of Russia's terror, rocket strikes, will cease to work. Russia must be completely isolated and punished both politically and in terms of sanctions. I thank our European friends for the 8th sanctions package. But look, the 8th package is not a punishment for Russia. Russia has started a new stage of escalation, and therefore a new sanctions package is needed, a strong package, and I ask you to develop it.
And your State Department spokesperson Ned Price says Washington does not see Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov's comments that Moscow is open to talks with the West over the war in Ukraine as, quote, constructive or legitimate to engage in dialogue. This comes after Mr. Lavrov said earlier that Moscow was open to talks but had yet to receive any serious proposal on which to negotiate. Mr. Price said this during a regular press briefing and insisted that if Russia was serious about talks, a first step would be to stop its, quote, brutal assault on Ukraine.
Tuesday, but it feels like a Monday. I think the timing is notable, and the timing is notable because this statement came within hours of a barrage of Russian missiles that targeted the capital city in Ukraine, that targeted other Ukrainian towns and cities, and that, as I said at the top of this briefing, struck playgrounds and schools and apartment buildings, road, bridges, heating infrastructure. We do not see this as a constructive, legitimate offer to engage in the dialogue and diplomacy that is absolutely necessary to see an end to this brutal war of aggression against the people, the state, the government of Ukraine. If the Russians want to signal that they're serious about dialogue and diplomacy, perhaps, and again, without being prescriptive, but perhaps a good first step would be to stop the kind of brutal assault followed by what appear to be nothing more than empty words. From the earliest phases of Russia's war against Ukraine, we have prioritized what our Ukrainian partners need to defend themselves from these sorts of attacks. You've seen the open source reports, the public reporting that Ukraine's air defense systems were effective in some of these cases. Of course, we want to continue to do everything we can to build up that capacity even further, because even one Ukrainian death from this sort of Russian attack is something that is the cause for great concern, cause for great regret. The good news is it is Jim Hewitt's birthday, so.
Let's talk now to Yinka Oyeniji, Managing Partner, First Chronicles LP, who is speaking to us virtually. Good morning to you, Mr. Oyeniji. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Mr. Ali. It's good to be your guest.
Let's take a look at the economics of all of this. The IMF is warning that global outlook is going to drop. In fact, some of the projections have already been dropped, including for Nigeria, in terms of growth as a result of this crisis. My last guest before speaking with you was talking about its effect in Britain and what's going on with the economy there. But speaking more broadly, when you combine the headwinds that are coming directly from the crisis in Ukraine and energy supplies on one hand, and you put that side by side with OPEC Plus's 2 million barrels plus cut in production on the other hand, and the slowdown in China, in output from China, productivity from China, the IMF isn't wrong to say that, look, things are going to get very hairy not too long.
Okay, so I'm trying to figure
where to begin from.
Yeah, I didn't even know you had stopped. Okay, all right. So this is what I think. First of all, while ruminating over what to say on this program, I just decided winter is coming. Winter is coming, and winter coming doesn't necessarily talk about the weather alone, even though it's a critical factor. Winter is coming for the rest of the world. Okay, so in developed countries on the West, heating is required in the homes, in public places, and then of course we have economies that are not stable, and then we then have this inability to be able to power these places to distribute gas and all of that. And so we should be in crisis mode already, all over the world. Countries like oil producing countries and energy suppliers should be benefiting from this unfortunate incident, but it is apparent that there's been a lack of preparation. All right, so you have Nigeria, who is a major exporter of oil and gas, unable to take advantage of this situation and improve our supplies. So winter is coming. You have unstable economies. I've mentioned it before. Germany is struggling with the economy. Germany is in recession. It's the same thing for United States. The pound is on a free fall, okay? And then, of course, this is combined with changes in government all over. Okay, United States in a few months will be talking about an election. So it looks as though that this war at this time is strategic, only in a negative direction. Okay, it looks like the heavens will fall. Okay, and so each of the countries should do well to start to consider the impact on the rest of us. In fact, the few months ahead, the next 3 months ahead, should be a time to try to save our economies and to save our resources, because winter is coming.
Let's talk about that a bit more when you talk about why do you say that we should begin to save our economies? When I was talking about, I was contextualizing the question where you said you didn't even know that I had stopped. When I talked about the situation in China. China is one of the global drivers of production because it produces so much for the world, and it's incidentally one of the largest consumers of energy. So any slowdown there will have impact on this. And there are those who are saying, look, shouldn't we find some kind of pause in the war in Ukraine so that we can deal with these other things? Because not all of them are directly related to the war in Ukraine.
A very interesting question. I'll tell you the problem with China. China is one of the most self-sufficient economies in the world. Okay, China consumes energy, China produces energy. You will be amazed at what development China has achieved in terms of renewable energy. I'm told that China possibly has its own artificial sun. So China's involvement in the war is not from a point of pain. All right. The only thing that can affect China will be the sanctions that will be levied on Russia. Now, understand what is happening. Russia would want China to be more active in this war. China tacitly supports Putin in this war, but China cannot come out publicly to say, you know what, it will be us and Russia versus Vietnam on one hand, Thailand and the rest of the countries on the other side. China would not want to hurt its economy. It's been in a raging battle, trade war with United States in recent times. That's been going on for many years. That's enough problem on China's plate. So China is not suffering from this war directly or indirectly. Russia is the one saying, China, you have to come to our aid for us to be able to win this war. China is not suffering nothing. China has a strong foothold in Africa, for example, and Africa supports China's economy, whether we believe it or not. Africa must be one of the largest importers from China. We import everything from China. China has a foothold in Africa. It's almost as though China has annexed major countries in Africa blessed with natural resources. It's there for all of us to see. Other than the fact that we even import, it's almost as though they've set up bases in different countries of Africa. The African Union leverages on China in more ways than one. China just built infrastructure for us in many countries other than even on the continent as a body. So China is well placed to be able to fight on behalf of Russia or to be able to stand alone, in fact, because China is successfully annexing developing countries without knowing it, economically, so to speak. So it is Russia looking up to China to say, come out publicly, just the way Zelensky is approaching the G7 countries for help. That's the same way Russia is looking at China to say, come to our aid. However, you talk about a pause. And I looked at the reports that you made just before I was brought on. And yes, Russia is looking for the rest of the world to blink. Who blinks first? That's what Russia is looking at. He's played all his cards. It's a last roll of the dice. Those missiles that were fired. Russia is running low on military supplies, on armaments. It's running low. Russia has been badly hit. Stop the war today, Russia is the loser. They played all the cards. Putin has annexed how many cities in Ukraine? 4. Is sabotaged power distribution. He's done everything that he possibly can. The very next thing is either it's a nuclear war that is coming next, or Putin himself will be ousted from office as the president in Russia. So who blinks first? He has rolled his last dice. After these attacks, he's low on military supplies. There's hardly anybody giving Russia any impetus to continue to fight this war. So it is about, that's why you will hear that tacit implied diplomatic talks. all right? But that is one way to explore, but it certainly will not end the war as it is. I believe that we may have to go on about 12 more months of this war, and it will have devastating effects on different nations of the world.
Now, I mean, you are in Nigeria and you're speaking to me from Nigeria. Nigeria seems to be having the worst of both worlds. There are some countries that are benefiting either directly or indirectly from this crisis. You referenced China's self-sufficiency. There are a couple of other countries in that bracket. And then there were those who are oil producing, who, because the price of oil have remained consistently high during this crisis, the price of gas has remained consistently high, they've also benefited. Now, Nigeria is not even producing up to its quota. That's on one hand. Because we import, on the other hand, we're also having to pay high prices. Things as basic as bread and wheat and all of that has been affected. So, coming from where you from the angle that you've come, having this situation should have been a cautionary tale for us, but it doesn't appear as if it is.
All right, so let me help to finish that off. And I do understand that it's like a black box with a lot of components in it that you may not even see. Now, it rises and falls on leadership. There's absolutely no doubt about that. All right, so where do we start from? First off, it's a tale of, I should be thinking of writing a book about this. It's a tale of leaders. It's a tale of citizens deciding who best to lead them. And I'm going to tell you why. Zelensky has shown to be a hero to Ukrainians in the last 1 year. They must be thanking God that they were able to elect somebody who is true, somebody who is determined, somebody who is powerful, somebody who's got the best interest of his country at heart as president. Now, imagine that Zelensky was not elected as president of Ukraine. Imagine that Zelensky would have loved to trade off his people for private interest in Russia. Where will Ukraine be today? Now, on the other hand, look at Putin, who also ascended leadership in his country and consolidated it in a nice move. He's been planning this war for the last 5 years. He annexed Crimea. There were those planes that were missing, aircrafts with people on board. And then, of course, he legitimized his illegal occupation of office as president for at least tens of years to come. He planned this carefully. Now, ask me, if his people knew that he was going to bring them to a needless war, would they allow him to become president? Second irony of these things. And then thirdly, look at developing countries such as Nigeria, blessed with mineral resources that we can refine and develop and use for the growth of our nation. But it is almost as though we have no recognizable foreign policy, which is, and it's sad, all right? Because foreign policy is just trade of a nation, is the economy of the nation, well balanced against foreign interests, taking advantage everywhere for the development of a nation. That's what foreign policy is about. I attended the School of Politics, Policy and Governance, and we were told how foreign policy cannot be exercised from foreign trade. It's the same thing. At this time, Nigeria should be flying. We should be getting so much resources. We should be annexing parts of Russia to enable us take a seat at the table to tell Russia at some point it's enough. Everybody needs our gas. We've got mineral resources that can power the rest of Africa, and I make no joke about that. Mozambique and Morocco power United Kingdom today. On the ground cables, we've got solar farms in these countries. We've got underlying on the sea cables, bringing power from Mozambique and Morocco to the United Kingdom. Those are African countries taking benefit of foreign exchange. What do we do in Nigeria? We earn foreign exchange and then use it to devalue our naira. I've never seen anything like that before. So we are going into elections yet again. Are we going to elect National Assembly members who will help to shape foreign policy that will be legitimized by appropriate laws? Are we going to elect a president who understands that there will come a time of war and that there will come a time of general recession all over the world, and Nigeria will take advantage of it? We cannot continue to allow mediocres with no sense of what foreign trade policy should be or foreign policy by itself or the point of military armaments. It's a shame that we have military that used to be the pride of Africa. We had ECOMOG peacekeeping. We were keeping peace in the rest of Africa. That was when we were rightly giants of Africa. But today, we have decimated military might. We have decimated military might that is fighting Boko Haram, and we call soldiers to local civil unrest. That must change, and it depends on the kinds of leaders that we elect going forward.
Indeed. You've unpacked that black box, and I'm happy that you did in the time that you did. Thank you very much, Yinka Oyeniji, Managing Partner, First Chronicles LP, speaking to us today for your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kerido.
After the break, Ukrainian soldier and amputee receives care and visit from Senator Duckworth outside of D.C. Please stay on with us. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back. Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that the situation around Ukraine's Russia-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is, quote, of concern. Speaking at a meeting in St. Petersburg, Mr. Putin told the International Atomic Energy Agency head, Rafael Grossi, that Russia was open for dialogue and would discuss all issues concerning the facility's operations. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is Europe's largest and has been a key flashpoint in Russia's nearly 8-month military campaign in Ukraine.
Of course, we observe the elements of excessive and dangerous politicization of everything connected with atomic activity. We do hope very much that thanks to your efforts, too, we will be able to calm down all this rhetoric and to normalize this sphere of activity and cooperation despite turbulent and complicated processes currently underway on the world scene. We are very happy to see you and will be delighted to discuss all the issues of our mutual interest, and which are probably even of concern to some and to us. For instance, it is everything connected with the situation around Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. In any case, we are open to this dialogue and happy to see you.
Russian President Vladimir Putin. Let's talk to Laddie Williams of our business desk, as always, at this time. Morning, Laddie.
Morning.
The IMF says more than a third of the economies in the world, and I can safely say that you know, there will be many usual suspects in that list,
right,
to contract in 2023.
Exactly. It was all about the IMF yesterday, all the projections and forecasts for 2023. And obviously, it's looking bleak because looking at where we are, you know, right now in 2022,
right,
2023 is just
it's less than 3 months away.
Exactly. And we still have the headwinds. We still have high inflation, you know, globally. We still have the war in Ukraine. We still have the COVID issues with China there, you know, having some of those lockdowns. And we know China's one of the powerhouses, you know, of global economy. So
absolutely.
At the end of the day, it's easy to see, you know, because central bankers all over the world are raising rates now, trying to tame inflation. So the IMF is even worried that, you know, at some point, these central bankers are going to have to ease earlier than expected because, you know, there's the R word, you know, being thrown around, you know, recession, and we know that these rate hikes will eventually, you know, lead to this.
Keep some countries into that.
Into that, you know, so, and, you know, having the big economies, you know, of the world on that list, you know, contracting, that's what the IMF is projecting. It is a big concern, and all of us need to be worried, and, you know, developing countries like us need to, you know, step up and plan, you know, for that time.
Iran and Russia are planning to connect their banking networks. This is a case of nobody wants to talk to you, nobody wants to talk to me, so let's talk to each other.
Yeah, let's just be friends, you know, it's us against the world at this time. So, basically, you know, we've seen them, you know, come up with these plans on how to, you know, make their transactions for their, you know, economic entities more easier, you know, so that because at the end of the day, they have to move away from reliance on the US dollar. So we've seen them try to, bring their systems together, talking about the Shitab in Iran and the Mer bank card. So we've seen Russia and Iran try to connect these networks just to have a seamless, trade and, to make sure the economic activities move ahead without restrictions, because the sanctions are ravaging.
Are really biting, indeed. Ukraine hopes to launch its own cryptocurrency in 2024.
Quite interesting.
Yeah, I knew this would be a story that you'd have particularly interested.
I guess they're joining the bandwagon now. Almost every central banker is looking at, central bank digital currencies. Obviously, they've seen how, Bitcoin has, worked and it's working, and how that reduces the cost of actually printing money, because you can just create these monies out of thin air, the blockchain, and everyone can see the transactions, moving in and out. So it helps, That's why we're seeing Ukraine actually look at, they were supposed to start the pilot, but obviously the war had to take their attention, to other matters. So they're planning for it for 2024. Be nice to see the e-hryvnia, come out at that time.
And finally, how are the markets doing? Yesterday, it was yay! There was some positive news for us.
But obviously global markets are still, reeling from what we saw last week. Come from that jobs report. But there's still issues. They're expecting inflation data that should come out either today or tomorrow, talking about the U.S. So the markets are still quite rattled. I looked at the futures and it looked like it's already pointing downward. But we're seeing Bitcoin, have a little recovery this morning. But it remains to be seen. We're waiting for that U.S. data either today or tomorrow, and that see the direction of markets.
That will be pushing a whole lot of issues to come. All right then, Ladi. I'm sure there's more of that coming up on a Business Morning, which follows this show, and then Bizzing later on the day. Thanks for now, Ladi. A quick look at some of the sport news. New York City Mayor Eric Adams has welcomed Team Ukraine baseball players to City Hall. The team will play 2 charity games against the NYPD and FDNY to raise money to reconstruct sports fields and complexes throughout Ukraine. The first game will be held on October the 14th against the NYPD, and the second will take place the following day against the FDNY. Game tickets are free, but with a suggested donation of $10.
It's for you. This is a national baseball team here today to raise money to really deal with the devastation that's taking place in the Ukraine, particularly around sports. We saw the images in our tabloids of how playgrounds are being destroyed, the bombardment of missiles hitting targets where there's just totally disregard of the young people. And so when you have these real heroes on the ball field and to the international community coming out, raising money, making sure that we can continue to allow our young people to experience sports in a real way. It's about sports. Sports has a way of uniting a country, a way of highlighting what a country is going through. And so we're here today in full support. I can't thank these men and women enough. The New York City Police Department will be playing the fire department and be playing the Ukrainian team. And so we're looking for a good game. As you know, the Yankees win the World Series. They're going to be here to making sure that we continue to highlight the devastation that's taking place in the Ukraine.
I wish just to cordially thank you. Thank you, your teams in New York City, for bringing here our sportsmen. We were just speaking about that minutes ago. It is very important feeling that our guys will take back to Ukraine. We are not alone. We are competing, and friendship will win. I thank you very much for your support, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
I have this much bone left on my right leg.
Ми дійсно потребуємо в неї, і
And finally, on the program, a Ukrainian soldier who lost his right leg in battle is now receiving care and prosthetics in the United States. Alexander Chaika received a visit from U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth, where they shared stories about losing their legs. Senator Duckworth, of course, also lost her legs in battle in Afghanistan and managing their lives as amputees. Chaika was an athlete and dancer in Ukraine when the war broke out. He joined the military in March of 2022, but was struck by a tank shell in April. The explosion covered him in dirt, infecting his leg wounds, leading to gangrene that would require a full leg amputation. A comrade of Chalker's was also injured, but was able to request support from a separate team who rescued both soldiers.
Your mind switches from, I can't do this anymore, I can't do that anymore, to, I can do this, right? And so it meant a lot to me to be able to do this, and I was really, when Mike called me and said, Tammy, I need you to come do a peer visit, I was like, I'm there, buddy. And so I've even gone to visit people before the amputation happened, for example, a cancer patient, and then be able to come back later on. But it is very fulfilling to see that new amputee progress and to a place where they can, in turn, pay it forward and help someone else. He's got a dancer's posture, man. I sit like this. You can tell he's a dancer. He's straight, and that's only going to help him with his walking. I'm a helicopter pilot, and helicopter pilots sit like this all the time, so I have terrible posture. But his posture is going to help him be able to be a better ambulator.
That final story of hope and recovery, getting up after you hit the ground. Thanks for being with us. That's our program this morning. My name is Ladi Akeredoluwale. Do watch out for updates within the world today and throughout the day on our various news platforms. But for now, do have yourselves a great midday week ahead. Good morning.